Hey everybody, this is a video about NIO, and I just want to give my own perspective on things going on and the current environment, because things are constantly changing with the company. But I was an early investor in NIO and Tesla, and yeah, I just want to share some of my views with the company and the overall stock market and just whatever's on my mind. I don't follow this company as much as I used to, just because there isn't really that much changes. I mean, you if you I invested early, maybe in 2019ish, into NIO, and so we if you're forecasting and trying to make predictions on where the company would go, you kind of already assumed like this is the growth path that NIO would go on. And anyway, I just want to share my current thoughts and opinions on things and share them. I'm not a financial advisor. None of this should be taken seriously. This is just my opinion. But yeah, I do want to maybe share some thoughts, and I'll take my time because I don't follow the company as much as I used to. But I do partake in the company's. I do have a vested interest in the company doing well over time, and so if I wanted to go over like how the company's going, as someone who checks on NIO maybe every a couple months or quarterly or something, yeah, anytime like the quarterly, anytime the financials come out quarterly, maybe I'll take a look at it real quick, just to kind of look at things like, okay, how many vehicles are they delivering? What are their revenues? What are their profit margins? Where's the company heading towards? Are they developing things like that? What about their mass marketed brand? How's China's economy doing relative to other countries? And a quick view of like geopolitical things going on and how the U.S. economy is doing and things like that. I'll go over these things like on a personal level, and I'll just look at these things. So with the company NIO though, I generally look for like, okay, yeah, how's their financials doing? How long can the company last? What's their cash burn like? And what kind of partnerships and things like that are they doing? Just to get like a general idea of where the company's heading. So let's just take a quick look at the latest news. Okay. So what's this? China's NIO considers tapping dealers to boost EV sales in Europe sources. Okay. Shanghai, October 18th. Chinese vehicle maker NIO is considering building a dealer network in Europe to speed up sales growth. Three sources familiar with the matter said even China's ease potential tariffs in region. Okay. I think it's a good choice to look into having European cars, like to brand better in Europe by using different dealers, I guess. That makes sense, because then you have some like, well, you'll have a larger reach, and then you also have you'll have a more familiar face, right? Because some people want to buy things that from people who look more like them. Okay, so I guess I could see this, and this would make sense moving forward, because if I think that if the United States and European economies decline over time, then I think if we look at like Asian American history, or just history in general, the America and like Western European allies and Western allies in general have had a very prosperous quality of life, I would say, in the past maybe one or two generations, right? And so there are a lot of privileges when it comes to being white in America and or in Europe or anywhere in this world. And I think that white people in general in more affluent countries and areas kind of feel like these privileges are being challenged. Um, because the byproduct of a multipolar world and the byproduct of more equality and more equity for everyone is just you're gonna have more. You're gonna have if the American country, if America has kind of like lived and benefited from colonialism along with other European countries, some, then you're basically giving back what you've kind of stolen. Okay, what you did steal, right? So if the current global financial system benefits from like America or a European centric type of financial system, then it's very exploitative towards like other countries that are like emerging economies or just in general. Like a lot of the way the system is structured is centered around like the US dollar, um, trade around the US dollar and things like that. Just as one example. So when America loses these privileges, right? Because rather than buy vehicles from America or Europe, people are looking to buy from Asia, right? Or Japan or China or Korea or Vietnam or things like that, then these countries lose some of their revenue, right? Which negatively impacts their GDP, their exports and things like that. So this does mean that like Americans' quality of life could go down over time, right? Because um, and there's always kind of been like if you look at history, right? Like Japan, when Japan was rising in the 70s and 80s, the American hegemony kind of challenged that by pumping a lot of anti-Japanese type of rhetoric and news, which became violent, right? Like you had white Americans start beating up and killing Japanese Americans, or if you look at World War II, you put Japanese in incarceration camps in masses, and it was all debunked to be just racist. It was just racist attacks, right? Because anytime you act irrationally like that, it is pretty racist, right? You're doing it because you have like prejudices, or you're racist, or you just have a lot of hate in your heart. And so we kind of see the same exact thing with China right now, whereas China is a rising economy and challenging the US and a lot of its markets from low, medium, and high. They are taking away revenue from like American companies, right? So like a lot of the companies on the S&P 500 and NASDAQ, and a lot of the big companies we see and small ones and medium-sized companies in America heavily rely on China, whether it be because we import their products and services and sell to Americans, or we rely on Chinese consumers to buy our products in order to bolster our revenues and things like that. So when we look at like companies like Nvidia, for example, Nvidia relies, I think, on China's the Chinese economy anywhere from like 15 to 25% of its revenues. Okay, so if American companies do restrict, or if the American government does restrict trade with China or gives China unfavorable deals when it comes to chips and things like that, then we should expect that rather than China just buy these chips for outrageous prices or and things like that, we would see that these Chinese companies will just focus more into research and development for their own chips, right? And I think we saw that with NIO, right? NIO chips, right? So we saw how NIO is trying to and has made their own chips in mass production, it seems, for this month. And then we also see like NIO's making a smartphone which is going to need chips and can, like, the profits from the phones and things like that, the chips for their let's see. So chips, like any kind of chip development that you have, or any kind of research or tech development that NIO has, will will hopefully allow for NIO to diversify its revenue streams. It also could clear up costs, right? Because I think William Lee said something like it would save NIO $100 per vehicle produced by making these chips in-house. And okay, so Yanjian, I don't know how to pronounce that, but let's see. No, it's not around here. Guess we couldn't find it. But basically, I think I read somewhere that, because this is pretty big news in my opinion at the time, like every vehicle that's manufactured that has these chips will now save like $100 per vehicle, which is a lot of money. And then NIO, if they're doing this big project in Hefei, right? If they do have these large manufacturing and tech areas, they could start manufacturing things like this in large scale and start selling them off, or using it to vertical integration, and become less reliant on other manufacturers, which makes like in-house much more cheaper. Because when you look at like Hefei, right? When you look at these kind of places, these are really big, and this is almost like a technology park where you have like vehicle distribution hubs, different research and development hubs, different manufacturing hubs as well, and this can attract a lot of talent. So yeah, it's good that NIO is building more in-house. But see, that's the problem when American like you can never really. I think there's a saying right now, right? Like there's two things I've kind of heard, that one, the Chinese economy is collapsing. Okay, I don't believe that's true, because one, if the Chinese economy did collapse, that would mean a whole collapse of the global economy. Like this would be worse than the Great Depression 2.0. It'd be way worse than that. And you can only imagine why, right? Because so many countries are reliant for China. And then what about suppressing our inflation rates, right? So like in the United States, we're trying to aim for a 2% inflation rate. How are we going to get there if Americans are really heavily reliant on Chinese goods and manufacturing and things like that? If we got rid of those things, we're never going to reach 2% inflation. We need Chinese goods because it helped alleviate a lot of inflation pressures, right? So if the cost of goods and services after you leave a Walmart or a Target generally costs you, I don't know, $100 after like a regular day of shopping, if we stopped trading with China, then even just by a little bit, like it might cost you 120, 130, 140, 150 accordingly to how much we disassociate with China. So it doesn't really make sense. Like this is counterintuitive to reducing inflation. Not only that, but if we do cut ties with China, what we're doing is we're just giving Chinese people and the Chinese economy reasons to invest more into research and development and expand on their own consumers, right? So my theory is that we're going to see declines in revenue from American companies that heavily rely on China, because one, the Chinese economy, it's just that a lot of consumers in China are starting to buy Chinese goods, and we see that when we look at just by looking at NIO deliveries. Let's take a look at this. Maybe CNAV Post has something. They're pretty good about this kind of stuff. As of August 1st, or as of July, we're already seeing like a steady increase in electric vehicle sales in China for for their premium electric vehicles like NIO. Um, this is negatively been impacting like European and American companies because Chinese consumers are a large portion of these companies' revenue. So rather than buy very expensive American vehicles that, yeah, the quality is okay, the technology is okay, you can just buy a NIO or a BYD or a Xpeng or a Xiaopeng or Geely, things like that, right? And China has a bunch of EV companies from like the lower, mid, and high tier. So it's like, why would you buy a BMW when you can buy a NIO and get all these premium electric vehicle services, and you can have like a domestic market that really cares about you and your country's success? So if you're a Chinese consumer, for example, right, wouldn't you, if you know that the success of NIO and all these other electric vehicles can benefit your country's economy, and they're pretty much neck and neck with like a lot of the leading traditional automakers in America and Europe and Japan, and sometimes better in some aspects, you're probably going to buy domestically because it supports you in every way. And so we see these companies like NIO, for example, taking away market share from these traditional automakers. But it's not only just in electric vehicles, it's in traditional vehicle automaker ICE vehicles, it's in like lower end goods. You see things like Shein and Temu, just, and Alibaba Express, all these things just taking away a lot of market share from US companies. And from the low, middle, and high tier, you see a lot of these things being competed with for Chinese consumers, which negatively impacts the revenues of American companies. But it benefits like Chinese companies. Is this bad? I would argue no. It's like, maybe innovate more, maybe get better. You don't have to be like the United States government and try to like, see, for me, I'm in America, right? And I want a NIO vehicle. I want to buy maybe the ES6 sounds pretty good. The EC6 sounds pretty nice too. The ET7, or especially the NIO S8. So I want to buy one of these vehicles, and that's going to be my first electric vehicle. I want the battery swap. That's one of the main reasons why I'm buying it. If I can't buy a NIO, then I'm just not going to buy an electric vehicle in general. If I can't buy, I'm not going to buy a Tesla. I'm not going to settle for a Tesla. I'm not going to settle for a BMW. I'm going to wait for a NIO to come in, or maybe I'll buy it unconventionally. And it's not my fault. This is America's fault. This is Europe's fault. Like, if you wanted me to buy your stuff, just innovate more, be better. But they're not. So that's not my fault. So when you look at the increase in like revenue from Chinese consumers going into these types of companies like NIO, it definitely takes away from other companies globally, whether it be from Germany or America. And so, yeah, we're going to see a lot of declines in like these other countries' revenues, and while we see Chinese companies increase in their revenues. And then, I think America should focus more on free markets, because I don't really care where the product or service comes from. I just want a good deal for whatever I can get in a declining economy during an economic downturn. I just want the best deal that I can get, and if it's from China, so be it. Let me buy it. It makes no sense. I don't really care if traditional automakers don't like it. I support free market capitalism, and I think that we should be able to buy Chinese vehicles. I don't want to settle for American or German vehicle if I don't want to. If I don't feel like it's good as a Chinese electric vehicle, I don't want it. And yeah, America should definitely support the free markets. I don't know. It seems like they're getting away from freedom, in this aspect. So yeah, this is just one example. When you look at these, they're taking away from other countries' revenues. So I do expect other companies like Nike or traditional automakers to have their revenues negatively impacted by things like this. And I kind of forgot what my train of thought is, but I hope they expand to the United States. I think I went on this long tangent, so I basically forgot what I was talking about. But yeah, I do expect like the revenues of these Chinese companies to go up, while United States and S&P 500 companies that are focused on in America will decline. And it's not a bad thing either. I mean, America has lived on such inflated standards of living for such a long time that they just kind of have to adjust to the ever-changing environment. But overall, I don't think the sanctions and trade wars are good. It just negatively impacts the United States companies. It negatively impacts companies like Nvidia, Walmart, Target, all these other companies, small shops, big shops, medium shops. They all rely on goods and products from China and then reselling it in America, right? Like your local fishing stores, for example, when you look at their lures, their fish hooks, their fishing poles, their lines, a lot of it's manufactured and made in China, and then they just upsell it by like 500, 600, 700%. Same thing if you think goods and services in Walmart and Target, like majority of it is manufactured in China, and then they upcharge you 1 to 1,000, even more percent, right? And as China's economy rises and the income per person goes up, then yeah, like you just have to expect that the prices for goods and services will have to go up in correlation. And there's just no way that you can disconnect the two countries. It's literally impossible. Where are you gonna find like millions of people in the hundreds of millions? Where are you gonna find youthful talent that have developed infrastructure and education to accommodate US consumers besides China? Probably nowhere, right? And you can diversify, which is what I think a lot of American companies are doing, but China just has such a good infrastructure. They can manufacture chemicals, they can manufacture drugs that we need, medicals, pharmaceuticals, high-tech goods, low-tech goods, textiles, our goods and services that we use and see every day. I mean, just look around you. Your smartphone that you use, the monitor that you're currently looking at, the headphones, earbuds that you're using, your coffee makers, your dishwashers, your parts of your vehicle, the technologies that you use, the research papers that you read. A lot of these things are made in China or have some association of China to a large degree in the supply chain. So you just can't cut ties with China, and I don't know who's being fooled into thinking that you can. As for Taiwan, I don't think any Taiwanese really thinks that China is going to invade them, because, well, from my understanding, that majority of the countries, even the United States, believes that there's only one China, right? Whether that be from the PRC in Taiwan or the people, PLA, PRC, or ROC, it doesn't really matter. There's only one China, and this is what majority of of the countries around the world acknowledge. Even the United Nations acknowledges one China. So there's going to be no reason to invade China. Does China want to invade Taiwan? No, there's zero reason to. Does Taiwan want China to quote-unquote invade Taiwan? No. There's literally no reason for this to happen at all. It doesn't make sense. Taiwan benefits from having the best of both worlds, between trading and interacting with China and America and the United States. Like, there's just so many benefits from being Taiwan. And Taiwan has a lot of its own problems too. Like, they might be a quote-unquote democracy in some sense, but America's democracy is declining. Like, I think America is only a democracy on paper sometimes. Like, there's a lot of things that go against democracy in America. There's times where we are fascist. There's times where we are authoritarian too, in a lot of ways. And like, can you afford democracy too? Like, that's another thing in America. So a lot of people can't afford democracy. And like, who's democracy for? Is it for white people? Is it for people of color? Is it for minorities? Is it for less affluent people? You know, like, can you afford that freedom? And is it an illusion, right? So when we look at our political system, you know, we try to vote in certain groups of people, but any things that we really try to vote for, we can't even get it. So it doesn't really matter. Do we have a lot of our own problems in America? What about our own genocides in America? You know, we have so many things going on. Do we cause millions of people to die or starve around the world? Are we in America the cause of that, perhaps? And then when we look at like the Uyghur situation, okay, well, does America do things like that? And even worse, what about the Native Americans? What about the Hawaiians right now? What about all these groups? What about black people in jail? Like, are we using them as slave labor almost? What about during the pandemic? Did we force a lot of Americans to work, you know, despite there being a deadly pandemic supposedly by the government? And could they afford freedom not to? Or were they forced to work because they didn't have money to afford to be safe at home, you know? So it's like, you can say that Americans are democracy or free, but you know, these are privileges, right? And I think America's losing a lot of these privileges that it once had. And it wasn't really free for everybody, you know, like, it's like maybe it was free for like middle class and upper class white people, but like, was it that way for like lower class white people? Was it that way for black people? Was it that way for Asians and other minority groups? Probably not. You know, it probably wasn't that great. So yeah, like when people say make America great, who was it really great for? You know, was it good for my ancestors? I mean, my family had a whole business between trading with Japan and China and Korea, and during World War II, a lot of their stuff was taken away, unrightfully so, and then they had to fight for this country. Yeah, they were thrown into Japanese incarceration camps, and all their assets were taken away and sold off, and they were given like a measly junk reparation. So it's like, who was it good for? This was less than a lifetime. This was like about a lifetime ago, you know, like, who was it good for, you know? And I think that's the problem with America. Like, there's not enough like cohesiveness, so we're never really on the same page when it comes to these types of things. And to me, it's like the American system's all about moving forward but not making things right. And then you have a bunch of people who are dragged forward who feel like things aren't right. And I think America's kind of having to deal with like trying to force moving forward but not making things right, in a lot of ways. So anyway, with the collapse of China's economy, I don't think there's going to be a collapse. I think it's going to be way better moving forward, because you can see that China's making a lot of deals and with other countries and things like that, and they're just becoming they're setting up the infrastructure for a lot of different countries, which benefits China's economy too. And this is kind of what the United States have already been doing. I would just argue in a less brutal way, you know. So I don't see the Chinese economy collapsing anytime soon. I do think that the real estate bubble is being popped in China, but I don't think it's popped like what we think it's going to be, like where there's a huge meltdown. I think it's going to be more like moving forward. I think a lot of Chinese investors are going to be punished. Like the high roller speculative ones are going to be punished, and then it'll encourage a lot of Chinese investors to go towards like Chinese stocks instead, right? To help bolster their own economies and research and development and companies, rather than like a real estate bubble. Like, I think that's what the Chinese government's trying to do, trying to direct capital from the real estate market into more of the investments, like their own stock market, right? That's why we see a lot of things like the Beijing stock market, you know, become a thing in the last 2 years, or we're going to see way more capital flow into Chinese companies. So let's take a look at this. So when we look at companies like NIO, for example, it's currently trading at $7.69. before the, let's see. Okay, so before the pandemic, the company was on the verge of going bankrupt, but um, the company had a lot of assets in hand, and also like Hefei, the Hefei government is known for like a lot of turnaround plays too. So a company like NIO, for example, just needs time, and that's what it got. You know, time is money, and money is time. So when Hefei and the bailout happened, it just gave NIO more time to enact this ambitious goals, and that's what a lot of these growth companies need. They just need time, because without time, they can never really expand on their plans, their business plans, and their business goals. So the current market cap is around 14.79 billion. I think at the time of the delisting, it was probably around a billion or less. This isn't accounting for things like assets and things. This is just looking at the stock itself. The highs were around. It was around $60 per share, and then we saw a crash. But when you just look at other things too, right? Like when you look at the Dow or the Nasdaq or the Russell, you know, on a 5-year chart, we kind of get a idea that, oh, like these NIO is performing really, really bad compared to the rest of the stock market, but that's not true. It really depends on what you look at. So growth stocks and a lot of these American companies, not just Chinese, but a lot of Chinese and American companies have been negatively impacted by the interest rate hikes and just, well, the overall stock market the overall bear market. So it looks, if we look at the larger indices like the S&P 500, it does look like, oh, like we are kind of near the all-time highs, like back in 2021, right? Back in 2021. But why doesn't it feel that way? Like why is everyone's stock market portfolios red? Well, it's mostly because, you know, we have like 7 stocks holding up the entire stock market, like Nvidia, Apple, Tesla, things like that, Amazon, Google, these things are holding up the larger the index, right? The S&P 500, the Nasdaq. But you know, when you look at things like the Russell, it's a little bit more apparent that maybe the stock market is doing as good. And then when you look at the S&P whole, it gives you like a better like visual of the stock market's health, and it's not doing that good. Like, you know, these companies, these indexes give us like a morphed perception of the real health of the economy. So NIO may be looking like it's doing bad, and it is, dude. This thing's at like $7, but if you're buying, hey, you know, like that's something good, right? If you're a buyer, you're like, oh, I wanna acquire NIO at a more affordable price. So if you think the market cap can justify, I don't know, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, right? If you think it can justify a larger market cap, especially like as inflation rises and things like that, it's like not even just because the company is doing well, which I do think the company will be performing well, right? I heard that, you know, they're going to expand into the mass market. They're going to make a single motor variant to like lower down its price basis. And they're, instead of like doing a price spiral, they're just going to adjust their vehicles to be more cheaper and more affordable for people, but it's still offering products, quality, and services. If that were the case, right, where you see NIO as the company just performing well, the deliveries keep getting better, they keep expanding, research and development, it keeps occurring, and they're making strategic partnerships with like the Abu Dhabi government, and they're expanding in China and other countries because, well, there's probably going to be a lot of success in these things. And then you have like the Abu Dhabi government having an invested interest in the company's success, and you see them being able to refinance their debt in like more premium, in more like reasonable interest rates, then yeah, of course you're going to see that companies like NIO are just going to keep performing well over time. But it does take a while for the stock to actually reflect these things because it doesn't happen overnight. Also, too, I think American companies, American investors kind of understand that if you invest in American companies, then that means there's more money for research and development that they can use to beat their own state government, their own states and countries companies, right? So like, if NIO had $100 billion market cap, perhaps they could raise tons of capital, which and eventually beat Tesla in research and development. But that wouldn't be good. That wouldn't be good for like Tesla or American companies, or if they're doing that to like GM and Ford, right? So, it's in America's best interest to have these Chinese companies at a lower price, because that means they can't raise as much capital. So I'm mostly looking at the market cap, right? The more market cap, the higher market cap they have, the more money that NIO can raise. So that would negatively impact European and Japanese and American automakers, because that means more money towards research, development, expansion. But you can't really suppress these prices forever. And I think it was Xi and Putin who had a discussion about like the unfair treatment of American companies, right? Because basically what we're doing is that we're saying, no, you can't expand. You can't use money to research and development if we're limiting access into these companies. So, we do see breakouts here and there, small ones, but yeah, they're usually suppressed, right? But I think when we look at these things, it's not just about like the technicals, right? It's also about like, really, if you're the American economy, you're an American business, right? If you're Toyota or Tesla or Ford, do you really want a Chinese competitor who's taken away from you, that's better than you, being able to raise capital and then expand their business and take away market share from you? No. So this is why I don't think America really supports free market capitalism, because it's like you're restricting American investors from trying to invest in electric vehicle companies in China. Like they're really against what free market's all about. You can't buy Chinese electric vehicles like NIO because there's so many like sanctions and trade restrictions and things like that. So it just makes it almost unaffordable. So it's kind of like economic coercion, right? So rather than say, oh, you can't do it, they just say, oh, you can, but we're making it so difficult that you're never going to want to do it. And that's just wrong. That's morally wrong, in my opinion, like, because you're negatively impacting the quality of life for not just negatively impacting the lives of Americans and Chinese people by saying that we can't have free markets and we can't support globalization. Okay, so when you look at these larger indexes, it doesn't really reflect the health of the economy. It really doesn't. Like, doing this, it's like, it doesn't give you a real perspective on these things, because there's only like 7 stocks holding up these entire indexes. So another example we can look at, let's just look at Bitcoin. It's not really anything of importance. Well, it is actually, it's very important, I'm sorry, but when we look at the 5-year chart, same thing. The patterns are very the technicals are very similar to other larger indices, or even like large cap stocks, right? They're trading very similarly. And then when you see companies like Tesla, it's like most of these companies aren't really at their all-time highs either. So let's see, what's a backbone? There we go. Walmart. What's another backbone company of America? Nike. It's not loading. Yeah, I mean, like, if you look at these things though, like, really, it's like, are these companies really doing that well? I mean, yeah, maybe operations wise, like they'll be okay, right? Like they'll they'll exist, but are their stocks anywhere near the all-time highs of during like the COVID era? Not really. None of them have managed to really do that. And a lot of these large caps hold up the S&P 500. Let's look at another classic company that's holding up the indices. Or not indices, not holding it up, but let's look at another historic American company that everybody loves. Okay, well, my Yahoo sucks. Let's see, Southwest. Okay, well, it seems like I think my internet's pooping out, but basically when you look at like all these kinds of companies, like majority of them aren't doing that well. So it's really it's just the indexes that are holding these things up. So you can't fight inflation by limiting trade of China. It's just going to negatively impact our inflation rates. It's negatively going to impact the businesses that rely on China. It's going to negatively impact everyone's quality of life. So you cannot cut trade of China. And so I think that over time we will probably see an increase trade relations with China. It's the only way that we can do it. Like, we have to have a win-win deal with China. We can't have a win-lose situation. And you know, whether we want to or not, China is going to keep growing with or without us. And I think it's best interest for us if we go with them, because our quality of life is negatively going to be impacted if we don't work with China. Let's see. Let's look at Hanesbrand, because that's another one that everyone loves. So if we just look at Hanesbrand in the past 5 years, holy smokes, in the COVID era it was at $20 and now it's down to $4, almost reaching $3. Oh, it did reach $3. Let's see. Amazon. Same thing with Amazon, right? It kind of replicates like the S&P 500 and NASDAQ and things like that, because these are the large caps that are holding up the indexes. Apple too. Okay, so Apple is doing pretty well. I think Nvidia is doing pretty well too, but my point is that like these companies are the ones that are really holding up the indexes. Yeah, so it doesn't benefit anyone from allowing these it doesn't benefit everyone, but I mean, yeah, it's good that you have like these kind of yeah, it's good that you have like these index funds propped up, because if they're not propped up, then you know, this affects people's retirements, right? So you need to prop up these indexes, but how you do it is very unhealthy. But yeah, you're gonna wanna like prop up these. You're gonna want to like make sure that at least the indexes and things like that do okay, because it's like, it sucks if you're down here during COVID lows and you're trying to like pull out your pension or your retirement, or you have your own portfolio and like everything's at its lowest. But if you are invested in like the S&P 500 or larger indexes like that, then yeah, you're probably doing pretty well. Like, you know, you're not at the COVID highs, but you're not at the COVID lows. You can definitely afford to retire to some extent, or at least, you know, cushion some of the inflation that's going on. But again, this doesn't really reflect like the general health of like stock markets from the mid, lower, and medium-sized market caps, or even the large caps. This is just propped up by a few stocks. So yeah, I think it's important that, you know, we look at this from like a reasonable perspective. Like, if we understand that it's not just NIO down here, it's numerous companies, both American, Chinese, and foreign. With the whole situation in Israel and Palestine, these things have been going on for, gosh, generations, right? I don't have too much to comment on that, but it has been going on for a long time. Same thing with Russia and Ukraine, the tensions there. So yeah, keep that in mind. I would focus more on the company and how it's doing. If the company continues to perform well over time, then well, the stock's price should reflect that over time as well, because you can't just ignore it over time, especially because one day these companies will be paying dividends, right? So if this company does perform really well over time and it offers dividends, then yeah, it has to go up because it's offering dividends, right? Because, well, the dividend's going to increase over time as the company does better and better. So everyone's going to want it. It doesn't matter where it's from. So overall, though, I'm looking at NIO, and I think the company's doing very well. I think that the mass marketed Firefly vehicle, I think they're doing already test runs on it. So this vehicle is going to be very competitively priced because it's going to offer the technology and resources from their premium brand, and it's also going to offer I think a single motor variant, and it's also going to offer all the technology and services that NIO, the main NIO, has, right? So that benefits the Firefly consumers rather than like a startup company that just offers lower end vehicles. You can like substitute some of the pieces from the premium brand that are kind of outdated, and then put it towards the lower end models. So I think it's something like what Tesla does, right? You use the high premium brand for expansion and research and development, and then you use that to subsidize your costs for the lower end, which is where a lot of your profits come from. And so overall, I think NIO is doing really well. You're going to see probably the volumes that Tesla had or has. And if they can compete with the prices of the Model 3, for example, then you pretty much get like the quality and services of NIO, which are better than Tesla in some regards. And then you also have like the battery as a service, which can lower the initial buy-in price of the vehicle, because you're separating the battery costs from the actual vehicle costs. So that means like a NIO Firefly, which is like the lower end single motor variant vehicle, can be much more affordable than a Tesla Model 3, for example. And at that rate, if you believe in battery as a service, or if you just want a quality vehicle at a lower price, then you might as well get a NIO, which is what I would do, actually. It's like, if I have a choice between a Model 3 and a NIO Firefly, I'm probably going to buy the NIO Firefly, because at least I can get battery as a service. And if I do believe in NIO as a company, right, not just a stock but as a company, then I might get premium services and products and services. And I do believe in battery as a service as a great service, because it keeps the vehicle shell relevant as the batteries improve over time. So yeah, overall, I think NIO is doing very well. I think a lot of these things are time to be told, but I think if we do see NIO improve in deliveries for their mass market and their premium electric vehicles, which I do see happening, the stock's price has to correlate with that. But if you're a large hedge fund, or you're a large investor, even if you're Bailey Gifford, if you want to buy into these companies and you want to expand your position, and a lot of the companies are held nowadays have a lot of retail investors, you want to shake them out, and then eventually you want to invest into these companies when they're much lower, right? Because to you and I, we have a finite amount of resources, right? We want to invest in companies so we can have a better quality of life over time. But these large investors and hedge funds already have a great quality of life. They have a lot of money. So when they invest in these companies, they're still going to be on their yachts vacationing, okay? They're still going to be doing whatever they want with all their money. And so it's like, well, if they invest now, right, at like $7, perhaps they will get, if it goes up to its all-time highs or something like that, then they're gonna, I don't know, they're probably gonna see like a 600 plus return on their investment over time, or more, right? Over time. So why would they? And if they have the power to make this go up drastically over time, even if it's like, if we all think NIO is going to do well over time, then they want to beat the stock down to make sure they get a great entry price and shake out all the weak hands and all the retail investors, and then buying it low, right? Just like any company. So if you have like the new NASDAQ in it, for example, as just a general thing, like all these new startup companies that are going to do well, right? You can kind of cherry pick which tech companies are going to do good, or just companies in general that are going to do good, you're going to beat them down as much as you can, get all the retail out, buy when the stock's really low, and then, let the company perform over time. It doesn't make sense for like a Bailey Gifford or BlackRock or all these larger indexes or hedge funds industries, all these kind of like money managers. They don't want to buy up here. They want to buy here. They want to buy down here. They want to buy down here. Because basically, if we hold these prices here, we're basically forcing them to buy in at these prices, right? So when you have things like the Abu Dhabi government, they have an invested interest in keeping the stock's price up over time and guaranteeing some good return on investment. So is that a floor in a sense, when you have things like the Abu Dhabi government thinking like this is a reasonable price to buy in? Yeah, you're going to have day-to-day lows and highs that I think the Abu Dhabi government is price per share around 8 or 9 or so, but it's like the day-to-day fluctuations don't matter to them. They want the returns, they want the dividends and things like that. So for you and I, the day-to-day might matter, but for large money, it really doesn't matter. It's all about their entry point and what it could be in a couple months to years and things like that. So it kind of seems to me like this is the consolidation, what we have going on right here. We saw a breakout here, but we see like a large portion of consolidation. It's a really long time to consolidate. And we see some consolidation here too. And it's just up to NIO to perform. So if you think that like the stock's at a good deal right now compared to its cash flows and revenue and assets and its future potential, then you got to kind of figure out what's a good price for you to get in. So if I were ever looking to buy into NIO, it's like I'm never going to want to buy up here because it's too expensive, it's unproven, and it's like, gosh, there's much better deals in the market. But as the stock price declines, you got to ask yourself, like, is this a good deal over time? Like here, good deal, right? Good deal. For example, not true, but just my example, right? Is this a good deal? Maybe. Is this a good deal? Better deal. Is this a good deal? At $7.09. Great deal, like, or was it an amazing deal if you had known what was going to happen at like $1.50? Yeah, it was an amazing deal. If you could do that, you'd put your whole life saving into this, right? So the stock's price, great, but you gotta think about like what's a good deal for you. And that's like anything in life. When you buy something, it doesn't necessarily matter is it good to someone else. It's like, is it a good deal for you? Does this look like a good deal for you? So I didn't really talk too much about the company in particular. Kind of talked more about general thoughts and ideas that come around with NIO and China. But you can only suppress the success of a country like China so long before like you have to admit like, okay, they're actually doing a lot of great things. Like you can't just suppress it, because if you keep doing that, dude, like the whole global economy is just going to collapse. Like you can't have billions of Chinese and Indian people being like suppressed. You got to like reward them and like justify them, and you got to show like, as we head towards globalization and equality, you cannot just suppress Chinese stocks forever. You cannot, because then they're not going to want to participate in the economy, and you're going to see them make trading blocks like the BRICS. They're going to make, yeah, it's an old thing, it's been going on for decades, but they're going to double down on that more, and that doesn't benefit the American economy. So you cannot have the American people just be so anti-free market. So with that being said, I hope the company keeps doing well. Hopefully it does, and I think that the stock's price should correlate with, over time, the positive performance of the company. So with that being said, I hope you all have a good